So the next thing I want to demo is setting default values with action tags. And this came up earlier this week. Carrie, who's usually on, who might have joined, I'm not sure, she had an issue with setting a default value using the action tags based on the values of other fields. So for example, it was like 10 or 12 fields, and whether they were 18 or older, whether they lived at home, whether they had a cell phone, whether they smoked, whether cigarettes were their primary choice for smoking, all sorts of things like that. And then depending on what that person answered for all of those questions, she wanted to mark the reason they were, like, if they were under 18, she wanted to mark their ineligibility based on the combination of those answers in a separate instrument on a separate in a separate field. So she had a field with all the reasons why somebody may be ineligible, and instead of having to go through and hand enter those or select the reason why they were ineligible, she wanted to use branching logic in a way, or not branching logic, but the if action tag and the default to get that value to be assigned. And so I helped her yesterday, and that kind of led me to, this might be a good demo for everybody, and a little refresher on some of these action tags, because there were some things I learned yesterday. I'd been messing with these action tags for a while, and there were some things that I had learned that I thought would be pertinent. So let's just go to let's just add a new record here, and we'll start with the first instrument here, which is going to talk about the if action tag. So if you guys have seen some of the videos that I've done before, you're familiar with a lot of the times we do like calc text. And so if we use calc text, it'll be like calc text. And then within that, we'll say if something. If first name is not blank, then, yay, and if it is blank, then boo, kind of thing. And this is sort of the crux of the if statement, but this is a completely different sort of function. This allows us to render a calc text, and this is an action tag. This is just a function of REDCap. And this is saying if first name, you're checking this condition statement, and if it's true, you're going to output yay as text. And if it's false, you're going to output boo as text. So this is what you guys have normally seen us do with calc text. If the if action tag is similar in that it has a similar format, in that you put in a condition and then you put a value if true, what you want, and a value if false. The difference is you're putting in action tags and not text. So here where we have, I can put whatever I want here. The way if works is if I say like if first name is not blank, then I want, or for example here, the example that we're going to use here is if name correct equals 1, then I want to make first name read only. So I'm adding the read only tag to the first name. And then if it's not, then I'm just going to leave it blank. So this is what I have set for this example here. So if I put in my name, and if I say that it's correct, nothing happens. If I say it's not correct, nothing happens. So that's by design. The if action tag only fires when the page loads. So it's only going to happen after we save and stay and save and come back. So if I hit save and stay, now it's applying the read-only action tag to those fields. So I'm saying, because I'm saying this name is correct, I don't want somebody to go in and change this value. Now, if I say the name is not correct, I can come back in. Now it's going to remove the read-only action tag and I can fix it. And if I say yes again, it's going to set it. And if I hit reset, it's going to open it back up because it's only checking if name correct is yes. So does anybody have any questions about if? Because we're going to kind of build off of that. All right. So the next thing is there are two ways REDCap allows you to set a value. There's actually three, but one of them isn't really used anymore. I think set value replaced it. There's the at default action tag, which allows you to set a value for a form that has not had any data saved to it yet. And that's really important. So it's only as soon as you open up a form. If I set a default value, and you can see here that I have default, red is the default here. If I change this value and save it, and I open it back up, it's not going to revert back to red. Now, the difference between that and set value is that set value happens every time the form is loaded. So if we have this value set as yellow, we have this value set as red. If I change both of them to blue and I click save and stay, default is going to change to blue because default only loads and fires when the page loads. So I had it set to red when the page loaded, but I changed it and then I saved it. But when I hit set value, I change it to blue. Set value reverts it back to the original value that you have it set as. And it runs every time you open up a form. So if I change this to yellow and I change this back to red, or change that to red, it's going to set them both to yellow because this is the set value that I have set for this. And this is just, now this is default is no longer working. So I can do whatever I want with this. I can even blank this out and save and stay. And it's no longer working. So this is important because if you're trying to use action tags to set default values, you have to decide whether you want those values to be set initially to kind of save somebody some data entry time, or if you want to be able to, and if you want to be able to override those values that are set, or if you want those to be hard coded no matter what, and you're using other criteria to set that value. And this is what I mean. So, and also I'm going to talk to you about calc text, because the way I do a lot of it, assigning values, is through calc text. Similar to the way we had this set. So I like to do things with calc text because I like to see that whatever I'm hard coding is popping up. And so let me go back and put a color back in for the first choice. So we'll say red, and we'll save this. Because, so with calc text, I have code on this form that is grabbing that value for the first color. And it's grabbing the value for the second color. And then the third color, what it's doing is it's running a calc text, like nested calc text. And this is what I have on the form here. So it's a bunch of if statements, just so you can see, and they're nested. So if you remember that the format for the if statement is if condition, and then if true, and then if false. Now, that's one one statement, but you can have nested if statements. So instead of if false here, you can put another condition in there because you're saying if this is true, just run it. But if it's false, try this condition. And if in that group of conditions, if it's true, try that. And if it's false, and that's how this is built. So it's saying if red and red, then it equals red. But if not, if red and yellow, then equals orange. But if not, so each of these are nested within, and you can see here that that's why there's a bunch of these closing parentheses, is because they're nested similar to this. Now I have this nested one that this parenthesis closes that one, and then this parenthesis closes this one. So I just have all the color mixing here. And you can see here that red and yellow make orange. Now, the reason I'm kind of showing you calc text is because this is the limitation of calc text. I have the exact same code here that's working in this text box, but it's not working for this radio button. And I'm assuming it's not going to work for checkboxes either because it's calc text. So even though I'm sending it the value that I have these set as, and I do have them set in the fields as well. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. Even though I have that value set and I'm sending it to this field, REDCap has no idea what to do with it. So this is where default and set value are helpful. And so you can see here that it's just like up above. And the other thing with calc text is when you run calc text, it makes it read only. I can't enter anything into those fields, but I can change these values. So same thing as before, it's pulling in the first and second color, and then it's automatically generating the color result. And this is the code that I'm using for that. And it's here, let me put that with the calc text so you can see how similar it is. So it's essentially the same. It's just I'm using, so this is for the set value. I'm using this as an action tag. So instead of just putting in the value of red, I'm saying set value equals red. Set value equals orange. And if this was default, it would say default equals red, default equals orange. And I'm not using calc text. So instead of just a plain if, I'm actually using the if action tag for each one of these. So like we saw for the default, I can go in and change these to anything I want. And I could say black and white make violet. I could do the same thing here. But if I save it, my default tag has allowed me to change the values, and those changes persist. But set value overrides any changes I make. So it has gone back to red and yellow make orange. And the only way for me to change that is if I go back to the previous form and select two different colors. Now, if I select two different colors here, if I select blue, this is going to change back to yellow. So let's change this to red, and well, this will be yellow. This will stay yellow, but we'll change this to blue. And we'll go back to the next form. So you can see here, I made the changes on the previous form. This is still black and white and violet, but this is blue and yellow, and now it's saying that it equals green. So in order for me to change these values, I have to change those values on a previous instance, or sorry, previous instrument, because I have this as set value, and it fires every time. So if you're doing something where you're looking for like eligibility criteria, especially complex eligibility criteria where multiple things have to be true or false or a combination of both, you don't want to have to guess whether or not you've made a change on it. You want that to fire automatically. So if the person is under 18 and they smoke and they don't live at home and they don't have a phone or whatever, you're going to set their eligibility criteria. And then, let's say your project or your study is open for a couple of years, and now that person's 18. Well, now they're eligible. But if you have this set as default, you don't want to have to go in and say, okay, now they're eligible. And then, their criteria changes, or you've made changes in one area and it's not reflecting in the other area. You want to be able to change their criteria, and they're 18 now. So it automatically triggers that they're eligible. So then this would change here, So if they were 18, well, if they're, if the age, if you have the age calculation of the age in as a field in REDCap, and then it automatically runs a calculated field of whether they're 18 or not. As soon as they turn 18 and REDCap updates that value, it'll update that eligibility criteria for you automatically instead of you having to go in and do it. So that's a really nice thing that's different between default and set value. And I believe prefill acts the same way, and I think that used to be what it was before they kind of, I don't know if prefill and set value existed simultaneously, but I think set value replaced prefill. But you can still use it, or if you have like an older project that has prefill, I believe it still works the same way. Does anybody have any questions about that, or want to see any of the design in the background, or any of the code? I'll put when I upload this, this should be part of the XML. I believe anything in the action tags gets saved in the XML, not like the JavaScript. Anytime I do JavaScript, that has to be a separate file. But I put all of the, anytime I upload anything onto the website, I don't know if you guys have seen, but if I do a demo that has code, or has if it's something that you guys are interested in building yourself, I usually will put a project XML, that way you can build the project yourself. But for anything that has a JavaScript component, I have to upload that separately. So then you would just you would enable the JavaScript injector, and then that's the code you put in the injector. But I believe since it's action tags, since these are all action tags, let's go to the designer here. Since these are all action tags, they should all be part of the design. So you can see down here, this is just default equals red, and here's all the so you can see here that it shows you all of these nested statements, but I believe all of those will be part of the XML if you guys are interested in trying that. Any questions?
I'm not sure everybody actually realizes that you can do what you did with the red, red, orange, orange, yellow, yellow. I think some people really get stuck on the fact it has to be numbers. So just highlight that one more time, that
yeah, and it can, so you can use text as a value in your field. The only thing is it has to be a single word, or it has to be connected by dashes or underscores. There can't be any spaces. Because if I had, for example, if I do like blue, green, and then I want blue, green, REDCap will tell me, like, it'll set a value for it, but it won't, it actually thinks that that's the whole thing. And it won't do blue, green, blue, green. But if I do, that blue underscore green, then it takes it. And most of the time what I would do the numbers, but I wanted to make this easier for you guys to see, because if this is like 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, and 6, then 1 and 3 make this, and that kind of thing. It's easier to see visually. Everybody kind of knows the primary colors and secondary colors. And then this way, it's just easier for you to see the kind of color mixing example instead of having to use numbers. One of the other neat things that I found in the action tags is that for default and for set value, you can actually have let's see, let's go to set value. I think it's a little clearer. Where's it? Oh, you can append this colon value to the field. So if you have a drop down, you can have it as this. So you can have like my drop down colon value, and it pulls in the value of the field. Because this here says to pipe the value of one multiple choice field into another multiple choice field. So that should work with, I believe that works with checkboxes and radio buttons, because REDCap treats radio buttons differently than other thing, or sorry, not radio buttons, checkboxes, because it does, it'll be like, instead of color underscore one, it would be color underscore one, and then it'd be like one equals one. So that would be like the first checkbox, and then this would be color one, sorry, color 1, 2 equals 1. Because this is saying that their first choice in this field is yes, and the second choice in this field is yes.
That value thing works with any type of field that has the alias in front of it. So the 1 comma something, 2 comma, if you use the value, you get the text instead of the numeric. But if
Okay. So
while
like up here for the like this here. So like instead of 1 comma 3, right? So
yeah,
if I had this as 1 red, 2 blue,
right. It would
um,
bring up the reds and the blues instead of the 1s and the 2s.
yeah. So like color, if I had color underscore 1, that would bring up 1.
Right.
Or sorry, color 1 equals 1 would bring up 1.
Yeah.
But if I had color value, that brings up red,
Correct.
right? Okay.
Yeah. But while you have that a minute, um, this is something that I found out, I don't know, in the past maybe year or so, that the whole goal of using the alias and why REDCap auto numbers your text selections for a dropdown. So 1 red, 2 blue, is to assist in the statistical analysis of the data that you're entering. However, I recently found out from a statistician that that is not necessarily helpful, that statisticians can just as easily analyze text. I think it depends on, what the text is. If you had some, like we have drop downs when you request help, it asks you what department you're from, and it could be kind of long, and there's a lot of spaces or something. I'm not sure how easy that is to analyze in a statistics package, but you would still have to keep, instead, if you were replacing the 1 with red and then having the option after it red, that's not as bad a standard procedure as I thought it was. You're not hurting your statistical analysis necessarily. And this is something I would discuss with my statistician before I started substituting the defaults that REDCap puts in. However, there are situations where keeping the color, like Manny just did, rather than having the 1 and the 2 he had, red, red, and blue, blue, that's That's not as off limits as I thought. And again, that's strictly a statistical analysis thing. That's why it gets substituted. But if you're in the design phase, then, if it's helpful for you in the analysis, it's okay to use red, red, and blue, blue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's if it's descriptive and sometimes it's helpful to have something descriptive, even if you're querying it in the database. One of the other things about them having them assigning the aliases is like if you had something like can't spell. Like if you had this as a value and somebody was like, that's too long, it's not, it's too, or if like our department, Center for Biomedical Informatics and Biostatistics, is like a huge mouthful. If somebody put that into a field and as a drop down and it was huge, and then somebody said, no, go back and change it to like UAHS. If you had, if REDCap was just using this, if it wasn't assigning an alias, now you have an issue with your data not necessarily matching. And, REDCap's not going to go back through your database and change those values, but it does allow you to change that value because this is the value that's being stored in the database. So REDCap doesn't care what you label that value in the front end, as long as you don't change the back, the value in the back. Is, if there's, let me preface that, if they're synonymous, like if somebody made that change and was like, okay, yeah, that's UAHS, but we just want to make it shorter for people. Now, if I change this to Caltech, that is a huge problem. Can't even spell Caltech. My fingers won't even let me change that value. Because we do have to warn people that they like to see things in order. And if they add a new value, like one is Dr. A, and then 2 is Dr.
Jay.
J. And then somebody's like, oh, well, 3 will be Dr. Now we have a Dr. B, but I don't like that. I want them in alphabetical order. So some people will go, oh, let me change that to B and that to J. And then they should immediately, like, their head should explode because they should realize that if they save that, it's a huge problem because now all those values are not what they used to be. So what you have to do is you could have Dr. B here in order. You just change it this way because REDCap doesn't care if these are in numerical order. It doesn't care what order they're in at all. So on the front end, you see these alphabetically, but on the back end, now the numbers aren't numerical in order, but you don't care. You never see that. So you can change, you can add values and you can move them, but you don't want to ever change a value to something completely different if you've already gathered data with that value. So anything that used to be University of Arizona Health Sciences, as soon as you change it to Caltech, if nobody catches that and people start entering Caltech, now you have records that are legitimately Caltech and were legitimately UAHS, but UAHS doesn't exist anymore. Everything is Caltech. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is one of the main things that comes through on the project.
Yeah, when we get the review changes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the reasons that, and of course, Carol brought this to my attention some time ago, that I've been toying with, is adding a class, and it would be online the way that we have our classes at the moment, but adding a class that is a precursor to the beginner, because it appears that there's a lot of researchers, clinical, or coordinators or whatever, that come on and don't even understand what REDCap is about and don't understand the concept of a database. So
Yeah,
it might be
something
useful.
like why would you use a radio button over checkboxes, or
Right. Well, just understanding the concept of how a database holds data, and then getting into some of the nuances, like the difference between what you see in the front end versus what's being held in the back end, what's returned, and you know, just what you actually are capturing when you're doing data collection so that it helps you maybe in the build subsequently once we get into the beginners class. And I never really realized that that was an issue for people, but it makes sense logically. I mean, we start out with database knowledge, the people that are working with REDCap, but I mean, that are part of CV2, but people that are just new coordinators that, you know, may have a medical background of some kind, but no database background, don't understand the concept at all. So they just get the front end, but then they're lost as to what actually they're capturing and why you can't do that kind of change like you were just showing with Dr. ABJ. So,
And
And
the
some of the
other
things-
item that comes up a lot is people say, okay, well, Dr. B left, so I'm just going to take him out of the list.
right.
Yeah, instead of doing the hide choice.
My choice has to be the answer there.
Yeah. Yeah, and then
REDCap.
same things with sort of along the same lines is showing people how to ask the right question, like setting up their questions correctly. Because some people will have a question that has trying to think of an example, but it'll be like, if this happens, then this, or you know, if X-ray was performed, this, and then, but they'll put it in one, they'll have multiple things in one question, and then it'll be, but then they want to break it out. So then the question really should be, was X-ray performed? If yes, then this, if no, then this. And it should be 2 questions, actually 3 questions with some branching logic, instead of having it all trying to get everything in one question, because then the problem is, you know, that question can have multiple states, and depending on what the state of it is, the answer is going to be different.
Exactly.
So it's better to say if X-ray equals yes or no, yes, then do this, no, then do this. And so, you know, some
I always
form.
tried to teach that when you're like, even if you're doing something, any logic statement, really, if it's complex or an algebraic equation, you know, if you break it up into pieces rather than trying to put it all together, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, this is great though. This is just this. I think this is so helpful for people that see this to understand that difference between set value, default, and how one is dynamic and how one is static. And this has been great. So thank you.
And that actually reminds me, one of the big things that I learned yesterday, which I had no idea, is with default, because it can only be enacted on a form when the form has no data. If you can set it as default, so when the form opens, so when we have, let me go back to this one, so the default here, or actually let me do a new record here. So for the default, you can have it automatically there when it loads. But one of the things I was doing with Carrie yesterday, or what I was talking to her about, is that she was fortunate in that the fields that she was using to base her value off of, her eligibility criteria, the fields were in a different instrument, and then her eligibility criteria, the field that she was saying had the radio buttons for the reason why they were ineligible, was on a different instrument. When I started building the demo for her, I had put them, because I just wanted to, because her problem was she wasn't sure why the action tags weren't working, and then it turns out that she had some errant parentheses that was actually causing the problem. But when I was doing it, as a demo, I just created an instrument. I threw some fields on the instrument, and then I was trying to use the default action tag, and it wasn't working because the default only fires when there's no data in that instrument. So only when the instrument opens. So if I open up an instrument and I had, like, if I was checking, like, if the person was 18 or they smoked or whatever, if I opened up an instrument and I had that criteria on the same page where I wanted that reasoning to update, as soon as I enter data for those, you know, they were 18, they smoked, they lived at home, and then I hit save and I reopen that page, that default's not going to work at all down on the bottom because it's on the same it's on the same record and instrument where I had already entered data. And that's where I learned that that this can only be on a form that hasn't been saved previously. And that's the difference between default and set value. So it was fortunate for her that she had the criteria on one instrument where she's entering the data. So that way, when she opens up the next instrument to the eligibility instrument, it's fresh and it's running the default. So that's another thing that's important for you guys to remember, is that if you are using default, you either set the value like I did, where it's just you're setting the values for the fields. But if you're using it like this, in this sort of instance where you have where you're checking these values, right now they're not doing anything because we didn't fill out the first and second color. But the reason this is working is because we're selecting the first and second color on a separate instrument. If I had fields here for first and second color and you were selecting those, the default wouldn't work. Set value would work, but default wouldn't. So that's another thing to keep in mind when if you have fields on the same instrument or if they're on different instruments. Because set value will override once you've entered and saved. So
That's awesome. Does anybody have any questions?